This video is in partial response to a comment on my video, the problem with the issue with transgenderism. The commenter, I don't remember her name, and I honestly don't remember the comment fully, because I haven't looked at it recently. But she mentioned that because the offence rate of transgender people is so minimal, it's not worth making big societal changes to adjust the prison system, adjust the bathroom situation, adjust the mental health support system. And that is true. But unfortunately, because of those tiny things, those tiny little instances, that can build up. And if we remember that some of them have happened already, and whilst well publicised, weren't that well discussed. According to some people, it might have even happened. To be honest, I didn't hear about the issues with men putting the trans card to get into female prisons down in Britain, down in England, when I lived there. It was only the incident of Isla Branson, yeah, that really brought to light to me. And J.K. Rowling does make a point that it can be triggering for some people who have been traumatised by men to have essentially a biological man come into a women's only shelter. I could answer all this in the comments, but I thought I'd bring up something else as well that I know is going to be a sticking point, and that is an interesting thing proposed by Labour for their manifesto. That being the complete abolition of swords. Now, I own a couple of swords. I've got a great sword and I've got a gladius, and I've got several other weapons at home as well. So that's a problem to me. Why are they doing this? It's to reduce the rate of knife crimes and stabbings. Unfortunately, there are several massive holes in their argument. Firstly, it's not going to affect the statistics of knife crimes, because the majority of them are done by domestic household blades. So that's kitchen cleavers, that's carving knives, that's cheese knives. It's basically any knife that you will have in the knife block at home, in your kitchen drawer. It's basically trying to address only the big profile things. Say some people were attacked by swords. Only a few of them. I don't remember the statistic. Matt Easton did a much better video on it. Second, other laws in the past have been presented to try and ban all manner of fancier, more exotic weapons, and that didn't change anything about the knife crime statistics. Thirdly, it's going to drastically affect a vast majority of industries that are actually specifically mentioned in this law, as they mention even fencing swords, so rapiers, foils, epées, sabres, swords that in the sport of fencing are blunted and buttoned so they don't cause harm. And that unfortunately extends to reenactment blades, which are purposefully dulled. And let's not forget those that work in heritage, who use them as demonstrations, as symbols, and theatre swords, theatre props, that sort of thing. So it's going to drastically affect an industry. Fourthly, and that's something I don't think Matt Easton actually mentioned, there's already a law out there that says we can't carry a blade that is more than 6 inches. And it doesn't matter if it's blunt for most of it and only about 5 inches of it is sharp. If the blade is more than 6 inches, it's still a blade, and therefore something you have to have a very good reason to have on you at any time. If you're wearing a costume, a uniform, whatever you want to call it, for reenactment, for the National Trust, or even if you're a member of the armed forces and have swords, that is very much something that you can put forward and say, yes, I've got this for that reason. I'm going to a ceremony, I'm going to a wedding, I'm going to work. I remember once actually walking through Hertford Town Centre dressed in full armour. So that was a gambeson, a shirt of mail, my leather shoulder guards, my leather greaves, my gauntlets, an arming cap, a bronze helm, a dagger on one hip, a sword on the other. I was carrying a shield and had a spear in the other hand because I needed to balance out all the weight. I was also wearing my long cloak to really put the message out there. And I remember hearing a policewoman saying, hang on, he's got a sword. Oh wait, he's part of St. George's Day. That was quite amusing actually. So it's obvious that the law was already there. The law basically already knew that carrying a sword was not a good thing. But if you're obviously in a costume that would signify you're there for a purpose, and the sword is there for a purpose beyond cutting people, which that sword would never do because it's blunt as anything. It's most blunt than most kitchen knives. Blunt than a butter knife, for heaven's sake. Well, upon noting something that I failed to mention in this video, and also something Matt Easton failed to mention, is that something similar happened in medieval Germany. That only resulted in a loophole being found in the technicalities and the creation of the Messer, which is essentially a big knife in every sense, only it looks like a sword and can be used in a similar way to a sword. But that's definitely not a sword, it's a knife. So it shows loopholes do exist and have been used in the past. The whole idea of Labour putting out that law as even a potential for their manifesto is merely verbal diarrhea designed to sway voters, which quite frankly just makes them look desperate and could potentially get them laughed out of cabinet before they even get to the polls. It's not going to work. I mention this because this is indeed a couple of minor instances that, whilst high profile, do not represent the whole. Similar to the cases of men pulling the transgender card to invade women's shelters or invade protected spaces. That are women only. They're not hypotheticals. They have been done. So why am I passionately against swords being banned, and yet seemingly very open to the idea of the transgender community being penalised for this? Well, I've got to mention very carefully that despite what it may sound like, I would far rather that transgender people, or trans people, whatever you want to call them, what do you want to call yourselves, the majority of them are not going to do that. They're just a few bad eggs, or, more often than not, people claiming to be transgender to levy the system. It happens. Criminals don't obey the law, as Matt Easton put it gloriously in his video. I'll leave a link to that video in the description. If I was to explain why I'm very against swords being banned, but for the more careful regulation of trans people in women's only sanctuaries, it'll be because banning swords affects multiple industries that are well known in Britain. We've got the reenactment community, we've got the sports and recreation industry, we have the blacksmithing community, we have the heritage community, and just the collectors community as well. And let's not forget the veterans who get swords as part of their military service. If swords get banned, those industries become villainized in the worst way possible for no reason whatsoever. And it won't change a darn thing. There's actually a big difference with the trans community in this case, because that can open the door to people opening foundations, shelters, or communities for transgender people who are suffering from trauma, who are seeking protection, who need help. There may be foundations out there, but not being a transgender person, I'm not clued in on that, because I'm not looking for them, I'm not open to them. But those sort of things can be reinforced, they can be opened, and more importantly, they can be brought into the public eye. Because instead of someone claiming that they are a woman and therefore should be allowed into a women's only shelter or a women's only prison, when it comes to the prisoners, I think they've broken the law. Why should we listen to them in that case? Especially if their crimes are related to the people they're actually intending to bunk down with. It's a bit like putting a paedophile in with junior offenders. You can see where that goes already. But this, if however we have shelters for trans people who have those traumas, who need shelter, who need protection, then that answers the problem in a constructive way, not in a destructive way. So that would be my response. If people start shouting, hang on, you've got swords, why are you against swords being banned because of tiny little things, and yet open to trans people not being respected in prisons because of rare instances similar with swords? It's because, in the case of the trans community, they can, and I would heartily recommend actually, and endorse, and even fund if I had the ability. They can open foundations, they can open shelters, they can provide the services needed for those people. So, the women's only services do not feel invaded by people potentially only claiming to be trans. Unlike the banning of swords, which is obviously going to be destructive and completely irrelevant to statistics, potentially even leaving holes in British industries that rely on them, we should be constructing things that allow for them. And that is the main difference between swords and the transgender community in this case. I hope that clears that up for people. It's a twist of logic, but when you understand things from a community perspective, especially if you're one of them, then you should be able to understand where I'm coming from with this. So stay safe.